Hello and welcome to the M is for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abbie Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian. And on today's show, we are going to dive into another episode of Whaddya Wanna Know Wednesday podcast style. We tried that out last month and you guys liked it so much and gave me such great feedback that I think we're going to make it a monthly thing. We'll do that in just a minute, but first I want to highlight our podcast sponsor, Voetberg Music Academy. You guys know our family uses and loves this way of learning music lessons that doesn't cost you hundreds of dollars a month. In fact, because you can share lessons between siblings, with my code MSForMama20 for 20% off each month that you're enrolled, your lessons can be as little as $30 a month. They offer lessons in mandolin, ukulele, fiddle, guitar, and piano, and they even have a community of thousands of other music lessons learners who can help you by encouraging you, cheering you on, and you can get live feedback from your instructor. If that sounds like something that would motivate your kids and save you a lot of time and money, you can use the code MSForMama20 for 20% off at VoetbergMusicAcademy.com. I also want to introduce to you our brand new podcast sponsor, Purely Parsons. Elizabeth Parsons and I have been real life friends for years, and I am so proud of her for making products that are safe, clean ingredients, non-toxic, and effective for your family. She really truly sees felt needs and addresses them in such an excellent way. My favorite products of hers, hands down, are her essential oils blends, which are certified organic and have such useful things like the tummy tamer and the digestive blend and the respiratory blend, which was a huge help to us when we were struggling with our respiratory illness for several months at the end of summer and the early fall. If you're looking for personal care products or for her flagship product, her elderberry kits to make your own elderberry syrup at home, you definitely need to check out Elizabeth's work at purelyparsons.com. Okay, friends, we are back with another edition of What Do You Want to Know Wednesday podcast style. You guys loved it when we did a version of this last month where instead of just answering questions in text on my social media, I also answered them in a conversational style here on the podcast. So I think we're going to make it a once a month thing. If I can get myself organized to do it, the goal would be the first Wednesday of each month. And hey, this is the first Wednesday of this month. So we are on a good track so far. I'm going to answer some of your questions from today, and just know that if you ever want to submit some and you are not on social media, you can either join me there at m.is.for.mama on Instagram. You can join my Facebook page and submit one there, or you could email them to me at abbie@msformama.net, ABBIE at msformama.net. And then I can consider your questions for the first week of the month when we'll do a podcast version of What Do You Want to Know Wednesday? So let's dive in. The first question is from my dear friend and longtime reader, Caroline Cordell. She lives in England. I almost got the chance to meet her. We had a meetup set up. She was going to host us at her home, which was so kind of her. But sadly, they got a stomach bug. And this was when we were in Europe with our whole family in the spring of 2023. And we had like 2 days left before we had to get on a plane, or maybe a day left, and we just couldn't chance all of us getting a stomach bug when we were trying to get back to the States. So we had to postpone that. And I say that with hope that it truly was just a postponement rather than a cancellation, because I would love to meet her one day. But she submitted the easy softball opener question: who is your favorite literary character? And that is an easy answer for me. I absolutely love Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. It's one of my favorite books. I've read it many times before, both as an English major and just recreationally. And Elizabeth is such an example of wit and self-control and intelligence and womanliness and common sense, but also a very flawed and realistic character. She's not just some pie in the sky perfect heroine. So I relate to her realism and her sense of humor and her down-to-earth personality so much. And she would be my pick for sure for a favorite literary character, at least as a heroine. So our next question is a little weightier, and it basically is asking how you best deal with the mental load of having lots of young children that are vying for your attention at all times. And I have several podcast episodes where I talk about creating rhythms in your home, where I talk about setting yourself up for success with peace within sibling interactions, and where I talk about reasonable expectations within the home. And I think all of those are really important things. If we are faithful and careful to invest in our kids so that there's not constant fighting, yes, there will be some disagreement, there will be bickering, there will be problems. That's guaranteed. But if it's not some constant stress and strain on us that our kids can never be trusted to play in the living room for a little while together without, trying to tear each other's hair out or screaming at each other, that helps a lot with our mental load. Now, I will freely admit that all of these suggestions are predicated upon a willingness to invest for the long haul rather than simply quick fixes that will make your life instantly easier. There are examples and suggestions I can give you that will make your life instantly easier, like not waiting to the last second to find shoes, or packing your snacks ahead of time, or making sure that you have snacks. Just kind of being prepared as much as you possibly can. Because while kids can do crazy stuff, little or big, like throwing up in the car on your way to an event, or, you got the shoes on them and then you put them in the car and somehow they kicked one shoe off just as you were closing the door and you didn't notice, and you get there and all of your planning goes awry because they've lost one of their shoes. Anything could happen. Let's just put that out there. However, we will instantly find ourselves less stressed and more able to deal with anything that happens that could come our way if we have planned for eventualities, if we have set ourselves up for success the night before an outing, or if we set ourselves up for success by having rituals in place or simple rhythms in place, like knowing what we're going to have for breakfast and making sure that we have the ingredients in the pantry, like making sure that nap times are generally at the same time each day so that our kids aren't constantly getting frazzled and overtired, like planning our schedules so that we can have some playtime right before dinner, preferably outside. I know that weather doesn't allow that all year round or in every climate, but giving ourselves some breathing room in our schedule so that we're not manically rushing from one thing to the next and dragging our tired small children along with us. Those are always great ideas. But they also require us to be really consistent and to invest over a long period of time to see lots of fruit, I would say. So being careful to set up parameters and boundaries for how your kids interact with each other so that they can actually play independently once they get to that stage, which isn't as far out as you would think. I have definitely had, an 18-month-old playing with his 3-year-old brother, and they'll sit there with blocks, or they'll both, scribble on an Etch-a-Sketch together and giggle. They'll look at picture books together. It is possible for very young children to play independently, at least for short periods of time, which is always, helpful. Anything 15 minutes is helpful for throwing some rice in a pan and starting a pot of beans, and so I think also being willing to recognize that you have more capacity for getting stuff done in small spurts of time than you probably even think that you do. So whether it's nap time, or whether it's those moments of independent play, or whether it's times when you have an older kid, I'm not talking about old, but like a 4-year-old in the bath with his younger sibling, and they're right there where you can hear them, and you can run a little bit of bath water and let them play with toys and splash around and run and flip a load of laundry and then come check on them. There's all kinds of ways that we can give ourselves a little bit of breathing space, even when it feels like everybody always needs you all the time. But one of the biggest things is acknowledging to yourself that this only littles season is not going to last forever. Now, I've had people say, Abbie, you have had small children in your home for 18 years. So obviously it does last for a really long time. But notice that I said only littles. You can give yourself some mental bandwidth and relief by recognizing that whatever stage you're in with lots of small children, 2 small children, 1 small child, won't last forever, because at some point they're going to get older. And if they have younger siblings, they're probably going to be able to participate in checking on them when they're in the bath, or stirring the pot of beans for you, or one day maybe even making dinner for you. My kids do this for me every now and then, and it's fantastic. So having that mental perspective that this is a season, it's especially intense. I'm in the trenches, but I'm laying the groundwork for fruit that's coming, for a harvest that's going to reveal itself bit by bit as my kids become more independent and helpful and skilled. that can really help the mindset shift that keeps us from thinking, whatever I'm in right now that's hard defines the rest of my life and it will never change, which is a very self-defeating and negative way to perpetuate a sense of victimhood. And that's not what we want. We want to recognize that as the adults, we are learning valuable skills to help our kids to thrive in the future. And that by digging in with grit now, by establishing our systems now, and by being patient and consistent and following through now, we are going to have more peace and less chaos in our homes in the future. So here's one that I get a lot and that I have addressed pretty significantly in episode 2 of the podcast, entitled, I think it's called Why We Have So Many Kids, with so many in quotation marks. But the question is basically, do you believe that family size is a matter of personal conviction, or do you believe that everyone should leave the number of children they have up to the Lord? And so if you have not yet, I encourage you to listen to episode 2 because I delve into that in more detail. But I want to encourage you to consider this idea. I don't know exactly, because I wasn't a fly on the wall in ancient homes, how they discuss their fertility. But I have an inkling that the kinds of conversations that we have around how many kids to have, how long to wait before having them, the spacing, the ideal spacing in between them, when we should stop, when you're quote unquote done, whether we should keep that number to ourselves or hand it back to the Lord, or hand it to the Lord in the first place. I think those are all fairly modern conversations. There's an episode, I'll have Ezra look for it and put it in the show notes, where I talk with my friend Jennifer Flanders about this phenomenon. And so we've become so inured with the idea that we should be the ones in control of our own fertility and a lot of other things, but specifically fertility, that's a big one, that we kind of can't grasp the idea that quite likely our ancestors weren't nearly as obsessed with whether or not they should have another kid or when they should have another kid. The inextricable link between sex and conception, sex and procreation would have been so assumed a couple hundred years ago and less, before the advent of chemical birth control, before the advent of condoms, before the advent of intrauterine devices, and plenty of other, at this point, sadly, things like abortion pills, where people can put a pill in their mouths and kill a very, very young baby in their wombs if they've, a Plan B pill or something like that, if they've had sex unprotected and become pregnant. Like, none of these things. Yes, I know there were herbs. Yes, I know that there were abortions in the past. And I know the question is about abortion, so I'm not trying to go down that path, but I'm just thinking that if we were not so inundated with commercials that assured us that if we just take this pill, we won't have to deal with periods or babies until we're ready. And if we were not so kind of avalanched with the concept that this is ours to take and ours to control, I don't think we would ask as many of these questions as we do. So I always come back to a very simple verse, and it's one that most people know. It's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. So while I do believe that the ultimate number of children and timing of them is a prayerful discussion between a woman, her husband, and the Lord, I also believe that every aspect of our lives should be fully surrendered to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, and that we shouldn't kind of carve out only our fertility and set it aside and say, since this involves the bringing of life into the world, then I'm going to say that this doesn't fall under the umbrella of God's sovereignty. So my encouragement always is to push parents back to the Word of God and say, what's the principle here? The principle is trusting God. The principle is seeking wisdom. The principle is seeking his will and doing all to the glory of God. Will that look like different numbers of children for different couples? Absolutely. In fact, and I've talked about this before, there are couples who excitedly enter marriage assuming they will have lots and lots of kids. They may not be the norm anymore, but they exist. They intermarriage assuming they will have lots and lots of kids because they don't plan to do anything to prevent, and they do nothing to prevent. And then years go by and they find themselves childless still, regardless of the fact that they've done nothing to prevent having children. And so, even if we come into it feeling like we're completely surrendered to the Lord, we may find ourselves kicking against the goads of infertility and saying, I was surrendered, but I was surrendered because I knew you were going to give me what I wanted. So, it can go both directions. I feel like that may sound like a convoluted answer, but really the simplest response is we should all be surrendered to the Lord's will in every aspect of our lives. What that looks like particularly will involve wisdom between us, our spouse, and the Lord. But if you're asking if we should all be surrendered to God's will, the answer is yes. Okay, this next question is interesting. It's someone that's asking for conversation starters for a quiet teen with a parent who's not much of a conversationalist. This is their words, not mine. So basically, I think you're having someone ask if you have two quiet people or people that aren't that into having a conversation, how do we get the ball rolling? I did not read this question and come up with a list of conversation starters for you. But I do have a suggestion for you. I actually talk about this in my new book that's coming out next year. I have a suggestion for you, which is to study the interests and personality of the child with whom you would like to have more conversations or more meaningful conversations. And then make yourself a list, whether it's a mental list, if you can keep up with that. My brain is pretty full these days, so sometimes I need to write things down. A note in your phone, a physical list in a journal. I want you to write down the things that you notice that child loves the most. What do they naturally, they may not be a super chatty child to begin with, but when they do talk, what do they talk about? Is it movies? Is it coffee? Is it writing? Is it basketball? Is it music? Is it hanging out with their friends? Is it politics? Whatever it is, regardless of how interested you are or not in it, make a mental note or a physical note. And then if you need to, do a little bit of research. What kind of music are they into? If you don't have a clue how to talk about basketball, well, there's a conversation starter right there. You can say, hey, you know what? I don't even understand the rules of basketball. Can you explain those to me? In the process of explaining them to you, if it's truly their passion, you're going to see their faces light up and you're going to see them become more animated and more detailed than they've been in the past, because suddenly you've touched on something that's dear to their hearts and that they're enthusiastic about talking about, and you're in. You can just ask follow-up questions and give feedback of, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Or, there is some effort on your part required after that. And I'm not saying just one simple question about the rules of basketball isn't going to immediately be the gateway to your child's soul, but paying attention to your child's specific interest is a great way to have things to talk about. You could also just write down some simple follow-up questions. Can you tell me more about that? What do you like the most about that? Oh, what makes you think that? Not in a combative way, but like, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. How did you come to that conclusion? Try to ask open-ended questions rather than questions that they can easily answer yes or no to. And then the conversation is kind of ended automatically. But I have found that if I will pay attention and if I will be intentional, that I never run out of things to talk about to my kids. It doesn't mean there's never lulls in the conversations, but those can be comfortable too. But as a general rule, we always have something to chat about. Okay, this is a question about publishing. And I know that some of you may be just like, okay, I have no interest in writing a book. That's probably the vast majority of people. But this is a question that I get asked, or some version of this question I get asked fairly regularly, practically every single week, because there are a significant number of people who would love to be published. And so I will answer this one. This is asking me how I chose which publisher to go with for my first manuscript. And so I'll just give you a little bit of background. Typically, if you're writing fiction, you want the manuscript to be completely finished before you query, that's the official word, an agent with your manuscript and or a teaser of your manuscript or a synopsis of it. And then you would acquire an agent, and the agent would then contact a publishing house that publishes the type of manuscript that you are trying to get out there in the world. Because if you go, for example, to a fiction house that does like holiday romances, because it can get pretty specific, or they do just kind of rom-com type material in general, and you're pitching a fantasy book, well, then you're probably at the wrong publishing house. If you're trying to pitch to a really big publishing house and they'll accept any kind of book, then it's fine. But your agent will know which division of that big publishing house to pitch your novel to. And very few big publishing houses accept what's called unsolicited manuscripts at this point. So you can't just type something up and send it physically in or send them a file. They don't even provide an email address to send that file to, because they would be so inundated. They get so inundated with these unsolicited manuscripts that they don't have time to dig through them all. And that's really, really hard. I actually wrote a manuscript for a novel when I was 25 and did some agent querying and some shopping it around. And it's just an arduous and disappointing process. It is a lot of work and it's hard to get noticed amidst all the noise. Then on the flip side, for a nonfiction manuscript, most of the time they do not want the manuscript finished before you pitch the proposal to an agent, or then they pitch that proposal to a publishing house. So I actually don't have an agent. My publishing house came to me because my publisher had followed me for years on social media. She's a fellow mom. She's the same age as I am. We have multiple kids that are born within 6 months to a year of each other. So she really resonated with the messages that I was sharing with my audience. She resonated with them personally. And then she was also looking for quote unquote new talent. And she had followed me for years, and I had been writing for many, many years on social media before she came and basically said, would you like to come write for us? I am with Harvest House Publishers, which is one of the few remaining independently owned, decently sized Christian publishers. Tyndale is another one, and I think Baker House might be the third. And so it's a mid-sized publishing company, definitely not little bitty, but definitely not huge. I love it because it feels like family. Heather, my publisher, she and I text back and forth. I don't have an editor and I don't have an agent, which makes me kind of unusual. I can go directly to my publisher and I get to skip a bunch of kind of the hoops and the steps to go through before I can communicate to someone. And those perks are huge for me. An agent typically takes 15% of your royalties, and that's over the course of the book. So if your book continues to sell well over 10, 20, 30 years, that agent is continuing to receive that royalty percentage, which is kind of nuts. I mean, it's a huge perk for them, but and they will receive that for brokering your advance on your royalties and any kind of percentages of your advance or any other details in your contract with your publisher, and also for getting you in contact with that publisher and getting them to accept your proposal in the first place. So a proposal is typically a 20 to 30 page synopsis of your book's ideas, main topics, chapter titles, kind of bullet points of the main topics inside the chapters. And I did not have a manuscript completely written. I just had the title of the first book that I wanted to write, which was Hard Is Not the Same Thing as Bad. It ended up being my second book. M is for Mama ended up being my first book, but I turned in a proposal for Hard Is Not the Same Thing as Bad. It was accepted. And then they wanted to call it Hard Is Not the Same Thing as Bad. And I said, that's not what that book is called. And they said, well, it should be called M is for Mama because that's your brand. It's very marketable. It's what people know you as. We should introduce the first book that way. And so we wrote a book called M is for Mama, which answered 17 of your FAQs that you've submitted on Whaddya Wanna Know Wednesday. There's 17 chapters in M is for Mama. And so we did it backwards. I mean, not so backwards, that they basically accepted the proposal. And then we set that aside, wrote that as the second book. And instead we started with the title, M is for Mama, A Rebellion Against Mediocre Motherhood. And I wrote the book to match it. And then we published that. So I wouldn't say that my path to publishing is completely conventional, although it is more and more common for publishing houses to approach people that have platforms and have a specific kind of book that that publishing house is wanting to get out into the world, or a voice that they want to get out into the world. Thankfully, in my case, it has been such a blessed partnership that Harvest House actually asked me to come speak at their 50th anniversary celebration a couple of weeks ago in Oregon. That's where they're located. And they asked two authors to come, Stormy O'Mardian, whom you might know as the author who wrote The Power of a Praying Parent and Praying this, that, or the other. There are a lot of blanks, and has sold so many of those books through the years. She is now in her 80s, and she is their best-selling author and kind of one of their flagship authors because they've been around for 50 years and she's written with them for more than 40. And then they asked me, as someone who is a present author that represents what they want to put out in the world going forward. And so that's kind of answering more of your question than you asked, but I just thought I'd pull back the curtain a little bit on publishing and what my experience has been, both as someone who was definitely rejected in the past and who didn't have their work accepted and know what it's like to try to get an agent to accept them and then represent them. And I didn't even get to that step. And then to the next one would have been for that agent to try to find interest from a publisher in the book that I already had written. And then on the flip side, investing in writing online for years and then having a publishing house come to me, which obviously is a more ideal situation because they already want you. They know they like your message. And then you have a lot more flexibility and, if not clout, sway in what you get to write about and how that looks like going forward. So hopefully that answers your question. If you do not already have a platform of some kind, a readership of some kind, I highly recommend that you start a blog or a social media account. You don't have to be huge for a publishing house to find you and want to give you a book deal. I had like maybe 18,000 people on my Instagram when Harvest House first came to me. But the consistency in writing and the ability for them to see your work and to see whether it's something that they want is really important. And then to see how your audience is engaged. Even if you're not a particularly huge account, if they see that you have an audience that is connected to you, that wants to hear what you have to say, that's interacting consistently, that's a huge sign to the publisher that this is someone that they could publish and sell books for. And ultimately, it's a business transaction. I mean, like I said, I feel like I have a bit of a family situation with Harvest House, but it's a business transaction. That publishing company needs to be able to sell books to stay in business. And then, of course, you want to be recompensed for your efforts because it's a lot of work to write a book. The next one is a really good one for moms that have a wide range of ages. It was basically asking how to balance prioritizing teenagers, middle kids, babies, and toddlers, and working together as a family. This is the season that I have found myself in for the last 4 years. Well, I've had a teenager for longer than 4 years, but the last 5 to 6 years with small children and teenagers and middle schoolers and elementary age children and just every age in between. I actually love having every age in my home. I know that it's a lot, that it pulls you in a lot of different directions, but it's also a lot of fun. There is always a different way to interact with your kids. And so a different meaning, like there are lots of options and they're good options. So it's fun. It's stimulating. It can be overstimulating for sure. But my suggestion would be to embrace it with open arms instead of trying to stiff arm it or control it too much. And what I mean by that is this. If you are a very regimented, scheduled person and bedtime has always looked like X, Y, and Z, very likely as your teenagers start to get more active social lives, as they get their driver's licenses and such, you're going to find that they come home. I mean, you can set your curfews, of course, according to your family's guidelines, but you're going to find that they come home later than they used to, that their bedtimes are later, that they might get home and they are excited about a movie they've just seen with friends or a basketball game they've just played or something that they've done. And they have all of this energy and they're hungry and they're making food in your kitchen when everybody else is asleep and you are winding down for the day. And you can either fight that and feel frustrated that your kitchen's getting messy again and that your evening time is being taken from you, or you can embrace it and say, this is when they're going to be the chattiest. This is when they're going to be the most animated. This is when I'm going to get the best of them right now. This won't be every single teenager, but it's not just the case in my own home. I've heard this over and over again from moms who have older kids that say, like, so often as they grow, the time when they are the friendliest, the most conversation, the most wanting to talk to you is kind of like when you're trying to go to bed. So being willing to sacrifice that time and realize that you might not have your wind down time that you used to, that you might not have your de-stressor rituals that you used to have. But again, there is only a season. I'm going to have a lot of teenagers, Lord willing. I already have 3, and I'm about to have a couple more next year. So very likely my season of this evening time or late evening time being theirs is going to last a long time. But let me tell you this. I was just thinking about this the other day. I was thinking that I couldn't remember the last time that I watched a show with my husband. So when you have only young children, you can get them into bed by 7 or 7:30. And then I know many of you know the joy of sitting down with a snack. The kitchen is cleaned up, things are put away, and people are in bed, and you snuggle under your husband's arm and you guys watch a show together or talk, or whatever it is that you guys do to decompress in the evenings. And I could not remember the last time that had happened. Sean and I used to have British detective shows that we really enjoyed watching, and we, I think, started an episode of the latest season of Shetland or something like that many months ago, probably in April. And we watched like one episode and we were both falling asleep about halfway through, not because it was boring, but just because we were tired. And we have not watched another one since, and I can't remember anything about that episode. And I thought, oh, I really enjoyed that season. That was fun. I kind of miss being able to do that. And then the thought that immediately followed on the heels of that one was, but how much better is it to hang out with my teenagers and talk to them than to watch a TV show? Yes, with my husband, which was the fun part of it, not just the watching of the TV show or the series or whatever. But what a joy to get to spend time with them, because that's the time that they want to. Ezra wants to go out on our pickleball court and dink at 11 o'clock at night. Do I always have the bandwidth for that? No. But when I do, I never regret spending that time. We literally did that last night. Sean and Ezra and I were dinking until 11:30 at night. And yes, I have been yawning today, but I'm so glad that I did it. So my first suggestion, especially with your older kids, would be to be willing to trade some of your rituals. Just set that as a season that you got to sit and watch shows with your husband, and maybe that doesn't happen anymore. But I guarantee you someday, if you want it to happen again, you will probably be the only 2 at home. And you might miss having your teenagers making scrambled eggs at 10:30 at night and chattering to you about the coffee house that they just went to with friends, or like I said, the basketball game that they just went to. Hopefully you're at the basketball game if you can be. We just were last night until late. And then the other thing would be to not kind of shift so much into older kid mode that you push aside the things that the middle kids or the younger kids still like to do. I think that naturally the younger kids, especially the very small ones, will become in that season where older kids' schedules might be driving some of the things that your families do, whether it's sports or theater or events that they need to be at if they don't drive yet, things like that. The older kids the younger kids may become tag-alongs to some extent. And we need to be careful that, while that's fine, they're probably having a blast following their older siblings around and being included in that we still take time to see them as individuals. And you're like, oh, great. So I have to stay up super late and give up all of my decompression time in the evening, but I also need to make sure, because I'll tell you this, I just saw a hilarious reel the other day on Instagram where this lady is basically parroting a bunch of really popular health advice. And it's like, make sure that you're prioritizing, eating first thing in the morning and getting sunlight in your eyes first thing in the morning, but also getting 8 hours of sleep, but also eating enough protein and enough fiber, but make sure that you don't eat too much too close to bedtime. Like, there's so many conflicting suggestions out there. And I want to make sure, and she did the same one with parenting, like, make sure you're firm, but also make sure you're not crushing their spirit. Make sure that, and it's hard to strike that balance. I can't deny it. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying you have to do all the things all the time. It's just if we're able to keep a couple of tabs open in our brain, which if you're like me, it's more like I have 540 tabs open in my brain all the time, but just a couple of tabs, like middle kids, little bitty kids, older kids. What do they love? How can I at least acknowledge that need today? It doesn't have to be complicated or long winded. And then give yourself grace to go to the next day and do the best you can with those same three tabs open, general categories. So for little kids, for example, sitting down on the couch and reading them a picture book or early chapter book, they love that. So yesterday we had a middle kid, a middle school kid basketball game. And then we went and grabbed some dinner between that game and an evening game with one of my teenagers. We dropped off the little bitty kids at home with some kids that were at home doing some school and hadn't come to the game. So that's, I mean, we do things together as a family, but not everybody has to be there all the time. And we went to the older kids game. We watched his game. So we were at two separate games. We did dinner together as a family and dropped off the little bitty kids. And then my elementary age kids wanted to read Hank the Cowdog when we got home from that later game. It wasn't super late. And so I read Hank the Cowdog to them before bedtime and went in and kissed my toddlers goodnight because they had been put to bed by siblings who were home. And then we talked to my son who had the basketball game for a while. He was wanting notes, and Sean was giving him notes about, hey, you did great on this, and let's try this next time. And so I was just kind of sitting in on that. And then I went and played pickleball with my oldest child. That's a pretty good example of what it looks like and earlier in the day, I will say, we had homeschooling and all the things. And I had run errands with just the little bitties, with just the toddlers. And they love being in the basket with mom at the grocery store. They love just being with you. It doesn't have to be complicated. So if you're like, wow, the toddlers got you at the grocery store, that was fun, they thought it was great. And they really enjoyed it. And they got to ride in the red car basket at the grocery store. So I interacted differently with different kids all day long, but I was still able to see and meet needs in every category without it being something that was pulling me in every possible direction. Although that is, I will admit, a very busy day. So my encouragement to you is to be flexible, to pay attention, and to be willing to die to yourself to some extent, because yes, it can stretch you to have so many different ages needing so many different things at once. And that's a fact, but it can stretch you and also be awesome at the same time. So I want to encourage you in that. And I'm currently living that. Someone asked me if I would be willing to share. This is, I'm just rolling into the next question. Someone asked me if I would be willing to share a regular week in my life. I get day in the life questions all the time, and I have a couple of them saved to my Instagram where it's just like, here's a normal day. We get up at this time. We do Bible reading. We have breakfast. We go to the gym. We do school, and that's a pretty typical flow. But someone asked me if I would be willing to share a typical week. And so I thought that was interesting because I was like, oh, now that makes me want to think through what a typical week for me would look like. Not that I don't know, but how I would express that to you guys. This has been a very atypical 6 weeks because I have had multiple speaking events, work events, travel with Sean. Sean's had work travel separately from me. And it's just been a little bit crazy. But we are in the lull after that. So I will tell you, for example, what this week looks like. And it won't be a perfect sample week for the entire year, of course, but I guess it'll give you an idea. So I described some of yesterday. I teach a workout class pretty early on Monday mornings. We start with family Bible reading. I teach that. I come back. My kids have finished their breakfast and are doing our first family cleanup of the day, which we call our morning routines. Everybody has a job. And they've started on math. I do math and language arts, and then catch up with their co-op work that they need graded or looked at. We do lunch. I get the babies down, the twinnies, the 4-year-olds, they're not babies, down for naps. And yesterday, by the time I did that and got everybody caught up on school and did a round of laundry. We had to jump in the car to drive an hour to go to a basketball game. That's not typical for us, but it is not unusual for me to have some kind of errand on a Monday afternoon. My mom is with us on Mondays from about 10 to 4, 10 to 3, somewhere in that range. And so she's, loading dishwashers, reading with a kid while I'm doing language arts with another child. She'll fold laundry for me. She's there throughout the day. She'll make food if that needs to happen. And so on a Monday afternoon, it's not unusual for me to schedule a dentist appointment for somebody or an ortho appointment or to run errands before my mom leaves from like 2 to 4. Sometimes I would write part of my book during the summer because that's a guaranteed time when I have someone there to hold the fort. Yesterday we drove an hour to a basketball game and then came back, got the dinner that I was talking about, and then drove about 10 minutes to the other basketball game. And you guys know what I did for the rest of the day because I've already described that. On Tuesdays, my kids have a homeschool co-op, and we have to get there, by 8:30 in the morning. So we spend our morning getting our bags packed and our breakfast eaten and things cleaned up a little bit, get out the door, drop them off. And then I typically take a walk on Tuesday mornings with my best friend who also illustrates my books. And we will either just chat about life or we will plan for business things. She's also my business partner with Paint and Prose and the one who does all of the art for that. And so if we've got business launches to plan or trips that we're going on where we have events that we're doing our merchandise at, or most of the time it's just talking about life, but we also do a fair bit of business planning there. And so we will go on a walk. We haven't been able to do it very much this semester due to extreme busyness and some other factors. Just life, honestly, but that's our typical habit. And then I will work on a little bit of emails or things like that at the gym when we get back from the walk. The walk is on a trail near our gym, and they are fine with our walking near the gym on the trail as long as they have our numbers and they know what we're doing, which is a huge blessing. And then I will do a little bit of work, and then I actually teach a fitness class, pick up the Twinbies. They're the only kids I have with me that day because everybody from Shiloh up is at our homeschool co-op. And then I will bring them home, get them lunch. I will usually podcast, which is what I'm doing now. And then somebody that drives, whether it's usually Ezra or I. Sometimes it's Sean, which it is today. He's being nice to let me get this podcast finished. We'll go and pick up 3 of our kids that are in piano from our homeschool co-op, drop them off, and then come back and pick up the rest of the kids, which are getting out of the co-op, and bring them home. And then at some point I'm doing laundry and making dinner and catching up on, anything else that needs doing, which is always something. And then lately we have had a pickleball league that we're in. It's not a really long league. We have two days left, I think, this week and next week. And so that happens on Tuesday nights. And we have kids that have practices. We have kids that are at home. We just kind of make it work. Wednesdays. And so we will get home around 9 and spend the rest of the evening with any kids that are awake or with catching up on anything that needs to happen. So that's not scheduled though after 9. On Wednesdays, I have a fitness class that I teach. So Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays are the days that I teach fitness classes. And it's very similar to Monday morning schedule, Bible reading and breakfast, fitness class, homeschooling all day. We do some practices in the afternoon, but typically one of my teenagers will help out with dropping off and picking up the kid that has a practice on Wednesday afternoons. In the past, we've had choir practice that we had to coordinate for, and then we do church in the evenings on Wednesdays. And sometimes I'll do a pickup order on the way home from church, and we'll unload groceries when we get home, get everybody in bed, just the typical evening routine. Thursdays, I don't have anywhere that I go particularly during the day. Sometimes I will record podcasts with guests on Thursdays in the afternoon. That's the second day of the week that my mom is at our house. And so it's an all-day homeschooling day. I'm typically home almost the entire day, if not the entire day. And then that is Thursday date nights for me and Sean. Right now, we have double pickleball for the week because we have that league that's short-lived. But typically we play pickleball with our oldest son and some other pickleballers at our gym because we have courts at the gym that I teach at. And we will all three go and play pickleball for a while. And then we will grab Chipotle. That's our thing because it's one of the places that's open. It's a little healthier than other options. And then we will come home. Fridays are our most unscheduled days. We do a little bit lighter homeschool, although we do that in the morning as well. And I'm doing, if it's an afternoon, a Monday, not Tuesday, because they're at co-op, Wednesday or Thursday afternoon, we do our homeschool read alouds and fold clothes and catch up on housework in the afternoons as well. So if we're done with school, that's typically what we're doing, or we're having free play. And the babies do nap. My twin babies, my 4-year-olds do nap in the afternoons, which helps a lot. And then Fridays, sometimes we have an appointment in the afternoon that day. We'll do Grace Girls on Fridays once a month. If you guys are familiar with that, great. If you're not and you want to learn more about it, I have a podcast about it. It's about mom friendships and Grace Girls, which is a homeschool girls group that I started that we do on Fridays, but not every single Friday. And then Saturday mornings, we actually play pickleball. We'll take the Twinbies with us to the gym, and Ezra and Sean and I will play pickleball in the mornings while the rest of the kids chill at the house. They're allowed to watch shows in the morning, so they might watch Dude Perfect, or the littles might watch Bluey, also, though they're usually at the gym with us. They might watch Dude Perfect or Mark Rober. They love watching his videos, and eat breakfast and sleep in and all those things. So we come home, we play pickleball early in the mornings, come home, and then the rest of the day is chores, projects. We will have some more sports games, as we have at least we have 3 kids in sports right now, which is unusual for us, but we have a soccer and 2 basketballs, but they're different ages. So probably we'll have some basketball and soccer games on Saturdays coming up. And then Sundays are church in the mornings. And then we just have a day of rest in the afternoons. We will hang out together, take naps, have dinner together as a family, play games, hang out on the pickleball court, go outside. So it's both complicated and not, meaning there's a lot going on, but it's pretty simple activities, I would say. It's just coordinating all of the schedules and fitting everything in. But we spend a lot of time at home together as a family. And those are kind of the constants. I say they're constants, and yet they do change, like the pickleball leagues or the homeschool sports leagues that we're in. And during certain seasons, we're going to have more of those than others. Right now, they are ramping up a bit with sports, so it's going to be busy. But that is a typical week for our family. Okay, so I'm going to answer one more question, and then we will be done. This one was about I can't remember quite how it was worded, but it was something like, tell us about being healthy, or how you try to stay healthy, or give us a rundown of your workouts and your food. And don't worry, I'm not going to give you a rundown of everything I eat and every workout that I do, but I have been a fitness instructor for 17 years, since before I had Simon. I think I was 5 months pregnant with him, and he will be 17 in a couple of weeks. So about 17 and a half years. And I was always active. Before that, I played probably 6 different sports growing up. Have always been athletic and loved to move my body, and got into group fitness when I was probably about 20 years old, and then got certified when I was 25 and started teaching. So I teach 3 fitness classes a week at the beginning of the week, like I mentioned just a minute ago. And then I will play pickleball a couple of times a week, sometimes 3 when I'm in a league. And then I also will lift weights or go on walks with a friend. So it's not a set amount of workouts, but I do work out regularly, probably 5 to 6 days a week. I do something, whether it's playing pickleball or lifting weights or teaching a fitness class or whatever. As far as food, I am certainly not someone who has perfect nutrition. I don't know anybody that has perfect nutrition. And of course, it would depend on your definition of perfect nutrition, but I do typically try to eat nourishing whole foods with simple ingredients and make simple meals for my family that have those ingredients in them. So I'm going to prioritize protein in the mornings. I'm going to try to eat within 30 minutes or an hour of waking up, because that helps balance your blood sugars. And I shoot for 30 grams of protein per main meal, and try to prioritize protein and fiber with any snacks that I have. So chicken and cottage cheese and eggs and, beans and nuts and all these things, fruit. Those are all staples in my diet. Am I willing to eat French fries? Yes, I absolutely am. Do I like Chick-fil-A every now and then? Yes, I absolutely do. But the goal, I love the 80-20 rule, where 80% you're focused on clean, nutritious, healthy, nourishing things, and you've got 20% of margin for stuff that's not perfect. Or sometimes downright terrible for you, like French fries. So hopefully that helps answer that question. And y'all let me know if you have any more questions for me for next month's episode. I was going to say next week, but we're not doing this again next week. We'll do it again next month, hopefully the first Wednesday of the month. And already it will be December, which blows my mind. It already feels like this year has just flown by. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's Whaddya Wanna Know Wednesday podcast style, and I pray that you have a wonderful rest of your day and week till I get to talk to you again. If you enjoyed the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.